Stone remembers what people try to forget. A sealed door can outlive an empire. A tomb can become a warning. A staircase can feel like a sentence. Dust can hide a secret for 3,000 years. Gold can survive where names do not. Sometimes the dead are buried with silence. Sometimes they are buried with silence. Sometimes they are buried with traps, and sometimes they are buried with questions. Tonight you are walking into 10 places that were never meant to feel your breath. And by the end, one of them will still be waiting in the dark. Across deserts, jungles, river valleys, and buried capitals, ancient tombs were built to do one thing above all else: keep the living out. Some use stone, depth, and secrecy. Some use spectacle, wealth, and fear. Some left behind nothing but a chamber, a body, and a mystery that somehow grew larger after the seal was broken. These are not fairy tales. They are real burials, real excavations, and real moments when the ancient world opened a crack and let us look in. But that does not mean everything inside was understood. Number 10. The Tomb of Seti I. The year is 1817. You are standing in the Valley of the Kings, where cliffs glare white in the sun and every shadow looks deeper than it should. Giovanni Belzoni uncovers the tomb that would later be catalogued as KV-17, the burial of Seti I, father of Ramses the Great. Even now, it is often described as the most extensively decorated tomb in the valley, a place where walls seem less painted than whispered over. Step by step, the passage pulls you downward. Corridor after corridor opens, not into rough darkness, but into color, relief, and astonishing care. The record says Seti ruled during Egypt's new kingdom, and his tomb reflects power at its most confident. Ceilings bloom with stars. Walls carry funerary texts meant to guide a king through the afterlife. The burial chamber even contains one of the earliest astronomical ceilings in a royal tomb, turning the stone overhead into a map of eternity. But that is not the strange part. The strange part is the feeling that the tomb was not simply made to store a body. It was made to keep a cosmic order intact. Every painted figure seems to be doing a job. Every chamber feels purposeful. Every threshold suggests that the living are crossing boundaries they were never invited to cross. Belzoni recognized the tomb's magnificence. But the 19th century did not think about preservation the way archaeology does now. Casts were taken from the walls. Tourists later pressed material against reliefs to make their own souvenirs. Fragments were removed. Smoke, graffiti, handling, and early copying damaged surfaces that had already survived more than 3,000 years underground. Here's where it gets strange. The tomb was built to defeat time, yet much of its worst damage came after it was found. Not from collapse, not from desert storms, from admiration. For people who wanted to carry part of it away, a 19th century observer lamented that the walls had been knocked to pieces. That sentence lingers because it turns discovery into something almost uncomfortable. What does it mean to open a tomb and save it, only to wound it in the same act? What does it mean when the danger comes not from a curse, but from human hands and human wonder? And what did Seti's builders expect a trespasser to feel in those painted halls? Maybe exactly this: the sense that beauty itself can be a warning. And there is another layer to the unease. Seti's tomb does not feel improvised. It feels rehearsed. The descent is paced. The imagery is paced. The revelation is paced. You move from chamber to chamber as if the architecture is controlling your heartbeat. That matters because the tomb was not built for a modern visitor carrying a lamp and a notebook. It was built for priests, ritual knowledge, and a king who expected the next world to function according to rules. So when a stranger enters, the chamber does not merely look old, it looks offended, not literally, not supernaturally, but emotionally, as though the rooms were composed to receive the dead and the divine, not the curious. That is why the tomb lingers in the imagination long after the facts are learned, because it leaves you with a difficult thought. Some ancient spaces were not just sealed, they were choreographed against you, and that is only the first door. Number 9. The Tomb of Puabi. In the ancient city of in what is now Iraq, Leonard Woolley and his team uncovered a cemetery that changed how Mesopotamia was imagined. Burial after burial appeared beneath layers of ancient debris, but some of them stood apart. They were deeper, richer, more structured, and far more unsettling. Among the most famous was the Tomb of Puabi, often identified as a queen, because of inscribed seals found with her burial. Her grave, known as RT 800, contained a woman laid out with extraordinary wealth. Jewelry of gold and lapis lazuli gleamed around her skull and body. The headdress rose above her like a frozen garden of metal leaves and beads. Nearby lay attendants, and beyond the main chamber, more bodies waited in the surrounding pit. This is where the quiet becomes difficult. Willie identified 16 burials at as royal tombs, partly because of their structure and partly because so many people seem to have gone into death with the central figure. Puabi's burial became one of the clearest cases. The seal naming her gave the dead a voice. The grave goods gave the burial authority, and the attendants gave the entire scene a chilling scale. The record says the cemetery dates to around 2600 to 2500 BCE. It also says certainty has limits. Modern scholars still debate how these graves should be understood. Were these occupants truly kings and queens in the sense we assume? Were some priestly figures? Were the attendants sacrificed, poisoned, or part of a ritual we still do not fully grasp? The evidence is powerful but not complete, and then it gets stranger. Puabi's burial is so rich, so composed, so ceremonially exact that it feels less like a funeral than a final performance. The dead are arranged. Objects are placed with intention. Music may once have been imagined there, because some of the instruments found nearby suggest that sound itself was buried as part of the passage. You can picture the last light before the pit was closed. Metal glinting, textiles bright, breath still warm above the earth. Then silence. No curse is needed here. The unanswered question is heavier than a curse. How much power did a person need in ancient for others to follow her into the ground? And what belief was strong enough to make that scene necessary? When the tomb opened again thousands of years later, it did not just reveal treasure, it revealed a society willing to build death as an extension of rank. A place where the grave did not level people, it arranged them, and perhaps that is the most unsettling legacy of The wealth is impressive for a moment. Then the arrangement takes over. You stop thinking about ornaments and start thinking about obedience, about ritual, about the final instructions no one can hear anymore. Who stood at the edge of the pit while it was being filled? Who watched the last attendants disappear from sight? Who left believing the burial was complete, correct, and even beautiful? Those questions are what made Puabi more than a museum case. They make her tomb feel active in the mind. The grave is over. The human problem is not. Number 8. The Tomb of Lady Dai. In 1968, workers digging an air raid shelter near Changsha in China struck something older than memory and far stranger than anyone expected. Beneath the earth lay the Mwangdui tombs, and inside one of them rested Zhen Zui, better known as Lady Dai. At first, this sounds like another story about wealth. A noble woman, a deep chamber, a store of grave goods, but the record says her tomb was something else entirely. Lady Dai had been placed within 4 nested coffins, one inside another, deep underground. The burial chamber was protected by layers of charcoal and white clay. Her body was wrapped in many layers of clothing tied with silk. Around her were food, drink, lacquerware, cosmetics, medicines, silk garments, wooden figurines, and a painted banner placed over the innermost coffin. More than 1,000 objects waited in the dark with her. Then the chamber was opened, and the archaeologists were confronted by something almost impossible. Her body was still astonishingly preserved. Her skin remained soft. Her joints could still bend. Internal organs were present. Veins and tissues survived in ways that made the burial feel less ancient than interrupted. Here's where it gets strange. This was not mummification in the famous Egyptian sense. Lady Dai's preservation seems to have depended on a rare combination of conditions: careful preparation of the body, airtight coffins, depth underground, the sealing effect of charcoal and clay, and a mysterious acidic liquid found in the coffin. The whole tomb worked like a machine against decay. Not a single trick. A system, a closed world designed so carefully that even time had trouble entering. Think about how eerie that must have felt in 1968. You dig through the soil expecting relics. Instead, you find a woman from more than 2,000 years ago who seems to have resisted the normal rules of death. The cloth is still there. The banner is still there. Food waits nearby as if the feast was arranged yesterday. Some people hear a story like this and rush straight toward the supernatural. But the record says otherwise. Lady Dai is mysterious. Precisely because the preservation is real, no legend is required. Science can describe many of the conditions. It still cannot make the first glance any less uncanny. What did her family hope to preserve? A body for the afterlife? A status that should not fade? A self that should remain recognizable long after the mourners were gone? Whatever the answer, the tomb did exactly what tombs are supposed to fail at doing. It kept the dead from changing, and the tomb preserved something else as well: scale. Because Malwangdui was not only about one body lying impossibly intact, it was about an entire environment prepared for endurance. The banner above the innermost coffin was not there by accident. The stored food was not there by accident. The lacquerware, figurines, medicines, and fabrics were not there by accident. Together they suggest a burial planned as a complete household in miniature, a closed ecosystem for a journey no one in the living world could inspect. When that kind of chamber stays sealed, imagination tends to fill the gaps with myth, but the truth is stranger. The planning was real. The preservation was real. And the face that emerged from the open coffin was once part of a system so effective it still shocks modern eyes. And if that does not unsettle you, the next one might. Number 7. The Tomb of the Lord of Sipán. Northern Peru, 1987. A waka called Huaca Rajada sits weathered under the sky, and local looters have already torn into it looking for gold. Before archaeologists can fully intervene, the old pattern has begun again. Poverty outside, black market inside, history leaking into private hands. Then Walter Alva receives word from the police and arrives at the site. What he finds becomes one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in the Americas. The tombs at Sipán were not just rich, they were found largely in place before looting could erase the meanings held by position, association, and ritual order. That mattered. Because context is what turns treasure into history, the largest burial was assigned to a figure now known as the Lord of Sipán. He had been interred with hundreds of objects made of gold, silver, copper, and turquoise. Ear flares, ornaments, regalia, and ceremonial items surrounded him in a dense field of power. Other bodies were also present, reinforcing the sense that this was not a lonely burial. It was a court descending together. The record says the Sipán discoveries helped scholars connect Moche art to real elite identities. Scenes, once seen on ceramics including ritual sacrifice imagery, suddenly looked less mythic and more politically embodied. The people in the art were no longer distant symbols. They may have been real rulers dressed to resemble sacred roles. And then it gets stranger. One item from Sipán, a gold backflap, had already been looted and trafficked abroad before it was eventually recovered in an FBI sting years later. So the story of the tomb did not end at discovery. It continued through theft, return, and the global appetite for the ancient dead. That gives Sipán a double shadow. The first belongs to the original burial. The second belongs to the modern world pressing in around it. Imagine the chamber at the moment it was sealed, textiles bright, metal catching firelight. Attendants arranged, a ruler dressed not just for death, but for recognition beyond death. Now imagine the same chamber centuries later, with looters nearby and a police intervention deciding whether meaning survives. That is how close this tomb came to becoming only rumor and melted gold. What were these objects for in the next world? Protection, rank, transformation? Or were they meant to prove, even under earth, that authority should still shine? Sipán feels eerie because the burial was nearly lost twice, once to time and once to us. There is also a bitter irony in the way the tomb entered history. The same gold that made the chamber sacred in Moche terms nearly made it disposable in modern terms. Melt it down, sell it fast, break the story from the object. That is what looting does. It strips the dead of sequence, and sequence is often where meaning lives. At Sipán, the order survived just long enough for archaeology to hear it. That narrow rescue is part of the tomb's atmosphere. You are not only looking at what the Moche buried, you are looking at what almost failed to reach you. But the strangest queen is still ahead. Number 6. The Red Queen of Palenque. The jungle around Palenque does not give up its secrets easily. Stone sinks into roots, stairways disappear under growth, temples watch from the green like things remembering themselves. In 1994, work at Temple 13 led to the discovery of a royal Maya tomb that would soon earn a name too vivid to forget, the Red Queen. Archaeologists, including Arnoldo Gonzalez Cruz and colleagues, uncovered a limestone sarcophagus whose interior was painted with crimson cinnabar. After the burial, the body and offerings had also been covered in thick red powder. It is easy to see why the chamber left such an impression. Even without fantasy, the visual is haunting. A queen sealed in stone, a chamber breathing red, a face once covered by a mask whose eyes, made of pale stone and dark obsidian, could seem almost alive when lifted into light. The burial is often associated with Lady Zakbu Ajah, spouse of the Maya ruler Kinich Jana ab Pakal. The identification is strong, but ancient burials rarely surrender every certainty at once. That hesitation matters, because mystery survives best in the small gap between likely and proved. Her ornaments were exquisite. Greenstone and shell formed a headdress. A collar of multicolored beads circled the body. Jade discs, shell, malachite, limestone, and obsidian turned the queen into a composition of sacred materials. But that is not the strange part. The strange part is what cinnabar does to the imagination. As a substance, it has a long history in ancient burials across cultures. Its red evokes blood, renewal, power, heat, and life. In the Red Queen's tomb, it makes the burial feel almost violently present. Not faded, not subdued, present. As if the chamber was trying to resist the colorlessness of death itself. Stand there in your mind for a second. The lid is lifted. The chamber opens. In a set of dry stone and bone there is red dust clinging to everything, as though the tomb has been holding on to a final pulse. Which of these would you dare to open? Tell me below. The record gives us the materials. It gives us the monument. It gives us a probable name, but the emotional logic of the burial remains just out of reach. Why this much red? Why this choreography of stone, shell, jade, and mineral powder? What transformation was being staged in that sealed darkness? Some mysteries are not about hidden mechanisms. They are about symbols that still feel active after 13 centuries. This is one of them. And the burial raises a larger question about royal memory in the Maya world. Was the queen being hidden, displayed to the gods, transformed, or all three at once? The chamber suggests concealment. The materials suggest announcement. The cinnabar suggests energy. The mask suggests presence. The whole tomb seems to oscillate between disappearance and insistence. As if the queen was meant to pass beyond sight without becoming absent. That tension is what makes the Red Queen feel so cinematic even in plain archaeological description. And nearby, in the same ancient city, another tomb waited under a temple staircase. Number 5. The Tomb of Pakal. Palenque had already been known and studied for generations when Alberto Ruiz-Luillier began excavating the Temple of the Inscriptions. The building was already famous. Its hieroglyphic panels contain one of the longest known Maya texts. Its architecture dominates the site. Its authority is impossible to miss. Then came the descent. Between 1949 and 1952, Ruiz and his team worked their way down an internal stairway deep into the pyramid. At the bottom lay a chamber holding one of the most celebrated burials in the ancient Americas. The tomb of Kinich Juang Pakal. The sarcophagus lid became world famous, not because it solved the mystery, but because it intensified it. The carving is dense, symbolic, and visually overwhelming. For decades, fringe interpretations tried to force it into modern fantasies. The record says otherwise. It belongs in the sacred language of Maya kingship, death, and cosmology. And still, even properly understood, it remains mesmerizing. The Temple of the Inscriptions itself feels designed as a vertical argument. Text above, king below, history on the surface, afterlife in the core. Scholars also note a cycaduct leading from the sarcophagus area upward through the structure, often interpreted as a symbolic pathway connecting the buried king to the temple above. That detail matters, because it means the tomb was not meant to be merely hidden. It was meant to remain connected to ritual, to memory, to communication between worlds. Here's where it gets strange. Evidence suggests parts of the tomb decoration may have been finished in haste after Pakal's death, while the rest of the temple's decoration continued more deliberately. That gives the monument a human rhythm, grief below statecraft, above, urgency in the chamber, control on the facade. and scholars are careful to remind us that some interpretations of the inscriptions remain provisional. Texts erode, decipherment evolves, confidence must have edges. That caution makes the tomb more compelling, not less. Because it means Palenque is still speaking, and we are still learning how to listen. Picture the final ceiling. A king enclosed in stone, a carved lid nearly filling the chamber, the stairway closed, the temple standing over him like a mountain of text. What was supposed to stay below? A body? A dynasty's claim? A divine passage only priests should understand. Whatever the answer, opening Pakal's tomb did not make the monument ordinary. It made it deeper. And one more thing gives Pakal's tomb its hold on the imagination. The monument was known before the burial was known. People could stand before the temple for generations without realizing that a king lay inside its body. That changes the way you think about ancient architecture. A pyramid is no longer just a backdrop. It becomes a mask. A staircase becomes a concealed vein. A text becomes a lid over the dead. Pakal was not buried beside the monument. He was buried as the monument's secret center. And from the Maya lowlands, we move to a royal mound in Macedonia. Number 4. The royal tomb at Aigai. In northern Greece, at the ancient capital of Aigai, royal burials slept beneath tumuli for more than 2 millennia. When unlooted tombs were brought to light there in 1977 and 1978, the discovery made a worldwide sensation. One of them has long been associated with Philip II, the father of Alexander the Great. Even without entering the identification debate, the site is extraordinary. UNESCO describes Aigai as a royal necropolis containing hundreds of tumuli and a cluster of royal burial groups. Among them are unlooted tombs whose grave goods and painted architecture place the site among the most important archaeological discoveries in Europe. That phrase matters. Unlooted. Ancient royal tombs are supposed to be plundered. That is the rule history teaches us to expect, but Aigai broke the rule. Inside, archaeologists encountered painted facades, precious objects, and an ancient Greek burial environment preserved in rare completeness. The interiors are described as entirely authentic, with only minimal modern intervention for stability. That means the chambers we picture are not romantic reconstructions. They are real rooms of power that somehow survived the oldest human instinct around treasure. And then it gets stranger. The tombs were so intact that their discovery revealed for the first time the complete facade of an ancient Greek building preserved in this funerary context. A tomb became an architectural time capsule, not just bones and ornaments, a visual argument about kingship, color, design.image.message.message. If the tomb linked to Philip II is correctly identified, then the chamber held the burial of one of the most consequential rulers of the ancient Mediterranean. If scholars continue to debate details, that debate itself becomes part of the atmosphere. Because the chamber does not hand over its name without resistance. You have the mound, you have the paintings, you have the grave goods, you have the thrill of proximity to a man whose son would redraw the known world. And yet archaeology still asks for patience. What was the tomb meant to do? Protect a body? Display dynastic legitimacy? Stage eternity in royal Greek terms? Probably all three. Aigai feels eerie because it preserves not just a death, but a confidence. The confidence that royal identity could be built underground and still command the future. And perhaps that is why Aigai feels less like a graveyard and more like a political statement that never stops speaking. The mound conceals, the paintings persuade, the goods proclaim. The tomb says that kingship should remain legible even after flesh is gone. To enter such a place is not merely to disturb the dead. It is to walk into an argument about power that expected to outlast memory. 3 tombs remain ahead, and one of them glittered in silver where gold was expected. Number 3. The tomb of Suzens I. By the time archaeologists uncovered the royal tomb of Suzens I at Tanis in 1940, Egypt had already given the modern world one breathtaking burial in Tutankhamun. So you might expect another royal tomb to arrive with fanfare. Instead, this one came with a strange kind of bad timing. World War II overshadowed the discovery, and perhaps because of that, the tomb of Suzens has never lived in popular memory the way it should. That is a shame. Because the record says it may be the only ancient Egyptian royal tomb discovered fully intact, not near intact, not mostly sealed, fully intact, discovered at Tanis by Pierre Montet. The burial revealed a royal body enclosed in an inner silver coffin inlaid with gold. That detail alone should stop you. In ancient Egypt, silver was rarer than gold, so when a king is buried in silver, the material speaks with unusual force. It says wealth. It says distinction. It says somebody wanted this burial to register as exceptional even within royalty. But that is not the strange part. The strange part is that the tomb was both intact and damaged by environment at the same time. Tanis lies in the wetter climate of Lower Egypt. Because of that moisture, many perishable objects did not survive as they did in the drier tomb of Tutankhamun. Wood suffered. Organic materials fared poorly. Metal endured, so when the tomb opened, it offered a paradox: an untouched royal burial, but not an untouched visual world. The robbers had not won, humidity had. There is something haunting about that. A king can defeat thieves for 3,000 years and still lose much of his burial to air and water. It reminds you that not every tomb is fighting the same enemies. Some fight intruders, some fight chemistry, some fight geography itself. Imagine the chamber under torchlight when Montet first grasped what he was seeing. A royal burial that should not have survived robbery yet had, a silver coffin shining from a darkness that had protected it better than the world remembered. How many times had history passed over Tanis without suspecting this? How many kings had become famous because they were luckier with climate, not grander in death? Suzanne's feels eerie because he exposes the accident hidden inside fame. The tomb existed. The king endured. The world almost forgot anyway. That near forgetting is part of the tomb's strange emotional texture. Tutankhamun became a global image. Suzanne's became an archaeological whisper among people who followed the subject closely. Yet one tomb was near intact, and the other, by the record, fully intact. The difference was not grandeur alone, it was visibility. History can be unfair like that. A chamber survives. A king waits, a war happens, and the spotlight lands somewhere else. Now we move to the burial that the world did not forget. Number 2. The Tomb of Tutankhamun. November 1922, a worker uncovers a step cut into the rock in the Valley of the Kings. The staircase descends. A sealed doorway waits at the bottom. Howard Carter peers in. The passage beyond is packed with rubble. Then another sealed doorway appears. A tiny opening is made. A candle is raised. Wonderful things are seen. That sequence has become so famous it almost loses its strangeness. But slow it down, and it becomes eerie again. For most of its existence, Tutankhamun's tomb had been hidden by debris. The record says it was robbed twice in antiquity, then restored and resealed. Later construction in the valley helped bury it further, shielding it from later waves of plunder. That is why it survived as the only known near-intact royal burial from ancient Egypt. Near-intact matters, not perfect, not untouched, but astonishingly complete by the brutal standards of pharaonic survival. Inside were gilded shrines, the sarcophagus, wall paintings, ritual goods, furniture, chariots, and objects so densely packed that the chamber looks less like a room than a collision between wealth and devotion. And then it gets stranger. Almost as soon as the tomb entered public consciousness, the burial divided into two stories. One was archaeological, the other was mythic. The archaeological story is already enough. A boy, king, a hidden tomb, seals broken in modern light, thousands of objects catalogued over years. The mythic story came later, growing around the death of Lord Carnarvon and the press hunger for an old idea that never quite dies. A curse. The record says no evidence of such a curse was found in the tomb. That should settle it. And yet the curse survives because sealed places do something to the mind. They make coincidence feel arranged. They make timing feel personal. They turn a fever, a death, or a setback into a message from below. What gets lost in that drama is the quieter, stranger truth. Tutankhamun's tomb did not need a curse to feel forbidden. Look at the architecture of entry. Steps, sealed plaster, hidden passage, blocked approach, nested shrines inside the burial chamber. Everything about the tomb says delay the living, slow them, test them. Make them work for every inch. Then, when they finally arrive, overwhelm them. That is exactly what happened. And perhaps that is why the story still grips people who know the facts, because facts did not kill the atmosphere. They built it. There is also a practical eeriness to Tutankhamun's burial that often gets overshadowed by the gold mask. The tomb was crowded, objects pressed close, passages were blocked, shrines nested around shrines. The king was enclosed again and again, as if every layer repeated the same command. Not yet, not here, not for you. That makes Carter's first glimpse feel less like simple discovery and more like intrusion into a system designed to delay every answer. Tutankhamun gives you the sensation of a tomb that was lost, found, doubted, mythologized, and still somehow remains intimate. One candle, one hole in a doorway, one man staring into a room the world had not seen for ages. Only one tomb stands above it on this list, and the strangest part is that it is still closed. Number 1. The Mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang. Near Xi'an rises a tomb mound shaped like a truncated pyramid. Beneath it is one of the most famous burials on Earth, and unlike the others on this list, the central tomb itself has not been excavated. That single fact gives the mausoleum a different kind of power. We are not standing in a chamber already opened. We are standing outside a door history still has not fully touched. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, ordered a burial complex on a staggering scale. The broader necropolis includes the terracotta army, pits, walls, and supporting structures spread across a vast funerary landscape. Ancient historian Sima Qun described the tomb interior in extraordinary terms. He wrote of craftsmen ordered to make crossbows and arrows primed to fire at intruders. He described rivers and seas rendered in mercury, set to flow mechanically beneath the earth. He even claimed secrets were sealed in ways meant to keep them from the living forever. The record does not let us treat every ancient description as simple fact. Some details are debated, some may be embellished. Some remain impossible to confirm without excavation. But then archaeology complicates the skepticism. Studies have reported anomalously high mercury levels around the tomb mound, lending support to at least part of the old account. Recent work has also explored where such mercury may have come from, tracing possible connections to ancient cinnabar mining networks. So the story becomes more unnerving, not less. An ancient text makes grand claims. Modern evidence whispers that at least some of them may not be fantasy, and still the chamber remains sealed. Here's where it gets strange. The mausoleum is famous, not only for what has been found around it, but for the deliberate choice not to open its heart. Preservation is one reason, technology is another. If the tomb contains fragile materials, murals, complex architecture, or toxic concentrations, excavation could destroy exactly what makes the site priceless. So, modern archaeology, unlike treasure hunting, is forced to accept restraint. That restraint is almost unbearable in a case like this, because every rumor of traps, every mercury reading, every ancient line about hidden rivers makes the sealed chamber feel like a challenge. But the record says otherwise. The point is not to satisfy curiosity at any cost. The point is to avoid becoming the final destroyer of what survived 2,000 years. That ethical hesitation may be the eeriest detail of all. This tomb was built to exclude the living, and for once, the living have mostly obeyed. Stand at the mound in your mind. No breach, no torchlight, no sarcophagus under camera flash. Only earth, silence, and an emperor still hidden behind engineering, legend, and caution. What is really down there? Mercury rivers? Collapsed chambers? Paint still bright? Nothing like the old descriptions at all? No one knows. That is why it takes the top place. It is not just a tomb once considered forbidden. It is a tomb that still enforces the idea, and maybe that is the perfect ending for a countdown like this. Because after all the broken seals, all the stairways, all the chambers, all the kings and queens and attendants and masks and coffins, the last image is not an opening. It is a refusal, and that refusal changes the entire meaning of the countdown. All the other tombs gave something up. A body, a chamber, a coffin, a set of goods, a scene frozen in ritual order. Qin Shi Huang's central tomb, by contrast, still withholds its decisive image. We do not get the final room. We do not get the emperor's chamber under modern light. We do not get certainty, only perimeter, evidence, text, and restraint. That might be the purest form of forbidden history there is. Not a secret because no one wants to know it. A secret because knowing it the wrong way could destroy it. Look back at the path we just took. Seti I gave us a masterpiece, harmed by the hands that admired it. Puabi revealed a royal death arranged with attendants and unanswered ritual questions. Lady Dai showed how a tomb could defeat decay with terrifying success. The Lord of Sipán nearly vanished into looting before context pulled him back into history. The Red Queen turned cinnabar, jade, and stone into a burial that still feels warm with symbolism. Pakal lay under a pyramid of text connected to the world above by sacred design. Agai preserved royal Macedonian death with a completeness ancient tombs almost never keep. Suzanne survived intact, but the climate gnawed at what themes could not reach. Tutankhamun reminded the world what it feels like when a sealed room suddenly answers centuries of searching. And Qin Shi Huang remains below the mound, where history, evidence, and caution still circle without entry. What ties them together is not just wealth, it is intention. These tombs were designed as barriers, messages, machines of memory, and negotiations with whatever came after death. To open them is to interrupt a plan. Sometimes that interruption gives us knowledge. Sometimes it gives us damage. Almost always, it gives us one more question than we had before. That may be why ancient tombs never lose their grip on us. They promise answers, then hand us atmosphere. They offer names, then surround those names with silence. They let us in just far enough to understand how much was meant to stay hidden. And maybe that is why ancient tombs feel different from almost every other archaeological site. A ruined palace invites reconstruction, a temple invites interpretation, a tomb invites trespass, even when the work is careful, even when the motives are scholarly, even when the findings are invaluable. There is always a moral pressure around the opened grave. Should this have been entered? Could it have been left alone? Would leaving it alone have protected it, or merely surrendered it to looters, moisture, collapse, and forgetting? There are no easy answers, only trade-offs. That is why the best archaeology often sounds less triumphant than treasure stories do. It knows every open tomb is both a recovery and a loss. If you want more mysteries from the ancient world, stay with Ozi Chalk. There is always another sealed door, and somewhere behind it, the past is still deciding how much it wants to reveal.